Okay, I think we're live. Um, so welcome everyone to the Native Wellness Institute's Native Wellness Power Hour. Um, I'm just trying to make sure that we're live here because it's not showing up. Um, okay, yeah, we're live. Okay, welcome everyone. Hi. Um, Welcome to the Native Wellness Power Hour. We are in week 28 already. The Native Wellness Institute we're a nonprofit organization. We like to say that we're a social profit because of the work that we do benefits society. We're celebrating our 20th anniversary this year in the middle of a pandemic and everything else that's going on. So we're super proud and excited about that. Um, when the
We are
pandemic first started, we knew that an already traumatized people would be re-traumatized. And so we came together and we had a meeting and we met and we brainstormed and we came up with this idea about offering daily power hours to bring our messages of wellness and healing to our people. So thank you for tuning in. We also know that people that experience trauma, one of the anecdotes, if you will, or the good things that we need is like is is boundaries and schedules and repetition, and that this is what the power hours offer. So every day at the same time in the same place, we offer the power hours. So thanks for tuning in, and we just invite you to share it on your Facebook pages so other people can tune in as well. So today we're talking about lateral oppression and lateral love. So we hear from lots of you out there tuning in, how these power hours have been an anchor for you, that they have helped you get through the pandemic and quarantining and all of that kind of stuff. And we're grateful for those comments. And then we hear from people about, can you do a topic on this? Can you do a topic on that? And this topic, lateral oppression, has been one of those that have been requested several times, or over a handful of times. And so we decided to do one on the topic today. So thanks for tuning in. My name is Jillene Joseph, and I come from the Aani people of Fort Belknap, Montana. I live in Oregon with my family, and I'm quarantining with my family. I'm a lucky one that gets to quarantine with my family. And I'm the executive director of the Native Wellness Institute, and I'm one of the founders of this organization that we started 20 years ago. And so pre-pandemic, we spend like 80% of our time out in tribal and urban communities providing training and technical assistance. That's what our organization does. We provide training and technical assistance. And then since the pandemic, March 21st, we went online with the Power Hours. Next month, we're launching our first online training, where you have to pay a registration fee. So the Power Hours are free. We're offering that for free. But we're offering our first training next month, and then we've done tons of other trainings in communities since March, or kind of since April, I think, is when we first started doing that. So we're actually doing a training right now for the Great Plains Tribal Chairman's Health Board. We're doing a training for them right now. I have a couple of colleagues that are doing that, and we're doing lots of other things for lots of other people. So anyway, thanks for tuning in. We're grateful for your support. And so we're just gonna dig right in. So when we talk about trauma, like lateral oppression is one of the lasting impacts of that. And sometimes I get questions from people like, geez, why are you still talking about historical trauma that happened so long ago? Or people will ask things like, what does historical trauma have to do with what's happening today? Like, I don't get it, I don't understand. And so, like, that's in part what we're going to talk about today, and talk about some of the solutions and things that you can do in response. And so, Oh, and then we also hear from people that like they'll describe their situation, what's happening to them at work or in their families or at school or whatever, and then we'll say, "Oh, that's lateral oppression." And they're like, "Really?" Like then they have like the language to describe it or explain it. And another good example of that is, back in the 80s, Maria Yellow Horse Braveheart is the one that coined the term historical trauma. And after she coined that term, we were like, oh, that's it. Like it gave us the language to describe what was happening. So we were able to better articulate it. So then we can figure out like what to do about it. And so that's kind of the same with lateral oppression. Some people will call lateral oppression a lateral violence. Um, and so we can think about it in those terms as well. So I have, of course, you can't see my screen. My notes are up on my screen, and so I'm trying to make sure I cover my notes so I can um, make sure I hit everything. So when I went to school, when I went to college, nobody taught about trauma or the lasting impacts of trauma or anything. And I was actually working then. And helping people to understand trauma and all of this kind of stuff. So again, like having the language to help us describe these things is so important. So I want to just go over some like uh, definitions of like what is lateral oppression. So I'm going to like read this definition. Um, and I'll post these on our Facebook page too, because we have them as handouts and we use these in our training. So I'm going to post these on our Facebook page after the power hour. So when we look at a definition of lateral oppression or lateral violence describes the organized, harmful behaviors that we do to each other collectively as part of an oppressed group. So we're talking about like us as Native or Indigenous people, and regardless of where we're Indigenous from, right? Because sometimes we have our friends and colleagues join us from Australia or New Zealand on the power hours. So it's the same in your communities as well. Um, and it's within our families, it's within our organizations, it's within the tribes or agencies that we work for, and it's in our communities. Lateral violence is the expression of rage and anger, fear and terror that can only be safely vented upon those closest to us. Those who oppress us do not hear us, nor do they assist us in changing the oppression. Therefore, it's unsafe for us to speak to them, so to our oppressors. Lateral violence is also referred to as internalized colonialism. So just like sit with that for a minute. Lateral violence is also referred to as internalized colonialism. Okay, so that's kind of deep. Basically, what that's saying is when we engage in lateral violence or lateral oppression, like we're doing the work of our colonizers. We're continuing the work of our colonizers. Like, isn't that wild? Like, that's that's what we're doing. That's okay. So just think about that a little bit. So we're going to talk more about that because it's, it involves like fear-based power and control techniques. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Lateral violence works to maintain power in an oppressed group when someone is seen to threaten that power in some way. Okay. And then it's also sometimes dangerous to shift that oppression. And so sometimes people just kind of like ride at the bottom of the hierarchy. So they don't like bring attention to themselves or anything like that. So okay, awesome. So in the chat on the side, if you want to type in like what are some examples of when you have seen or experienced lateral oppression or lateral violence? Go ahead and put that in the comments on the side. Okay, so I want to get back to that internalized colonialism. So we know that colonization is like what happened in our ancestors past, right? So when we talk about this country, first being invaded, when we look at genocide, when we look at the longest walks, when we look at being placed on reservations, boarding schools, massacres, all that kind of stuff. Those are examples of the historical trauma, right? And so that was a part of colonization. So even though that may have started in 1492, through 1592, 1692, 1792, 1892, like it still continues today. The lasting impacts still continue today. And how it does that is through colonialism. Colonialism is another ism, just like racism or sexism or classism, etc. Right? It's another ism that still plays out today. So when we engage in lateral violence or lateral oppression, like I said, we're continuing the work of our colonizers. Okay, so what happens then when a people have been oppressed? So colonization was based on another ism, racism, right? It was based on white superiority. And if you can envision like a circle, and most of our tribal teachings and our tribal understandings and our tribal value systems, like see everything as a part of that circle, right? Whether it's human beings and animals and plants and all kinds of things as a part of this circle. What white superiority does is people see themselves above, like outside the circle, above the circle. And they even put some people below the circle, right? So some people are better than, and then some people are less than. That's kind of like how I would visualize white superiority. So colonization was based on that, right? That our ways were bad or wrong, our value and our belief systems were bad or wrong. And so we were forced to change and forced to believe in different things. So we were held down. Like that's kind of like oppression. When I visualize oppression, I visualize like a great big thumb being placed over somebody else, like a great big thumb holding us back or holding us down. That's how I visualize lateral, or that's how I visualize oppression. So you can think about how would you visualize oppression? Like what would that look like to you? You can put that in the chat too. How would you visualize oppression? Okay, so what happens, and we've learned this like through social science research, what happens when a people have been oppressed for so long, like we start believing that. We believe it in our heads and we believe it in our hearts. That's what internalized colonialism is. We believe our colonizers that we are less than. We believe our colonizers that our ways of thinking and being are bad, are wrong, are less than. Okay, that's what internalized colonialism means. And many of our people now in the year 2020 still believe this. Many of our people now in 2020 still believe this, that we're less than. Okay, so what happens then? And here's the bigger picture example. In this country, because this country was founded, my hands are in quotations, this country was founded by men, right? Women are oppressed in this country, and that plays out in many different ways, right? We don't make as much money as men for doing the same jobs, as an example. Men still have much of the control and power, even in Congress, even if that's slowly changing. We can look at different segments of our society where men, prevail, right? So that's an example of how oppression against women still plays out in our communities today. Even when different explorers or people came to this country, sorry, it's like all loud outside. I don't know if you guys can hear that. Anyway, when different explorers came to this country and they were like writing down what they saw or heard or felt or whatever, it was mainly from a male perspective, and they didn't write about the women, right? They didn't write about the women. Anyway, that's like a whole nother thing, like the patriarchy, right? But the example I'm trying to give is in this country as a whole, regardless if you're white or black or brown or however you identify, lateral oppression amongst women is real as well. Okay, and that we see that play out in many different ways, including like politics. like when Hillary Clinton was running for president, and so many women came out against her, right? Anyway, that's like a whole nother workshop too. But I'm just trying to give like the bigger picture of oppression. So us as Native people, the indigenous experience around colonization, um, when we internalize that we're less than, when we see people that look like us or live like us or believe like us, inside of our minds and inside of our hearts, we believe and think that they're less than as well. So we're going to treat them worse than our oppressors oppress us. That's lateral oppression. Okay? Or some people call it lateral violence. That's what it is. When we internalize it, and then we believe it here and we believe it here, and then we act out on whether it's a family member or whether it's a coworker, whether it's a community member. Okay? So I see in the comments, I'm not reading all of them, but I can see some of them, how lateral violence or how lateral oppression plays out. Okay, so people are giving examples. Disenrollment as an example. That's a good one. Sabotage, rumors, abuse of authority, cyberbullying as an example. Tons of other examples. So thanks. Keep them coming. How you experience or how you see it playing out. Okay, awesome. Okay, so that's where it comes from. It's a lasting impact of colonization, even that's hundreds of years ago, right? And over those hundreds of years ago, it just like builds and it morphs and it changes, and we get better and better at being laterally oppressive. We get better and better at being laterally oppressive. Just like think about that for a minute, right? So the manipulation gets better and the way we do it gets better. And it just keeps going and going and going and going. And then it becomes an example of intergenerational trauma, because lateral violence or lateral oppression is trauma. It's trauma. So when we're gossiping or bullying someone, we're inflicting trauma on another person. So we become part of the problem in our places of work or in our families or in our communities, right? That's why we're trying to bring this awareness. Like, this is why the Native Wellness Institute exists, in part, is to help bring this awareness to our people, right? To not only bring the awareness, but to bring the solutions, all right? Okay, so we're going to go on. And we're going to see, we're going to talk a little bit about the characteristics of lateral violence and and what it looks like. So the key characteristics of lateral violence, we repeat our original oppression by oppressing those around us. Okay, so I just described that, right? Through colonization, we were oppressed as tribal people. We learned that very well. We internalize it here, we internalize it here, and then we repeat that to those around us that look like us. And oftentimes, our oppression to our own people is usually harsher. It's usually stronger. It's usually worse than from our original oppressors. Okay. And then we usually find techniques that normalizes this, right? So the reason we're talking about this is because this behavior like isn't normal. It's not healthy. And sometimes we grow up in this, like we just think that's just how it is, right? That's just how it is. And an example of that, back in the 80s, I was in college back in the 80s. And like three of my mentors told me, don't go back and work for your own people. And they didn't use the words lateral oppression, but that's what they were describing. That's what they were describing. That's what would happen, because 30 years before that, when they graduated, that's what happened to them, right? So they're telling me, don't do this because your people will chew you up and spit you out. Like, and they were using those kinds of words to describe lateral oppression or lateral violence. Well, guess what? That was back in the 80s. Here we are, 30 some years later. I'm still hearing the same thing. All of our young people who are graduated from college and they go back home or they go to their urban agencies to work, and guess what's happening? the same thing that my mentors told me about 30 some years ago that happened to them 30 years before that, like it's still happening. So the lateral oppression and lateral violence is still alive and well. And that's another example of the intergenerational trauma. Like it keeps going. So it becomes a norm. It becomes normalized. Like this is just how it is, right? And I'm here today to tell you, like, it's an unhealthy behavior. We're doing the work of our colonizers when we do that to another Native person, okay? So another key characteristic of lateral violence is that we intensely focus on the negative in another person or another group. So this is an interesting dynamic because it's also chronic negativity is a lasting impact of trauma. So when you're around a family member, a colleague, a coworker, a spouse, a partner, whatever, and they're just like this kind of like continually grouchy and negative person, that just means they have some unresolved trauma in their life, right? And healing is the answer to trauma. We'll talk about that later when we talk about lateral love. So when we intensely focus on the negative, okay, this is another key characteristics of lateral violence. Any piece of information can be twisted into the negative, or assumptions made, or fear-based conclusions about something. And it really is that deficit-based thinking. Okay, think about that for a minute. Deficit-based thinking. Trauma contributes to deficit-based thinking, where something is always, we know something's always going to go wrong, right? Or you know, we only focus on the negative. We only focus on, like, you know, how bad things are. So even, for example, this month, we're coming up to the end of this month, but it's awareness month for people that take their own lives, right? And we can think about even how that is reinforced in our communities by how often we say it, and focus on the negative and all of that kind of stuff. So that's why today we're talking about lateral oppression and lateral love, right? Because that's the anecdote. It's the flip side. Just like when we talk about historical trauma, we also talk about historical wisdom. So that's the flip side. So we're not just staying stuck in the deficit-based thinking, we're moving also to the abundance-based thinking. Isn't that awesome? Okay, so that's just things to think about. So another key characteristic of lateral oppression is the collective cooperation. So collective cooperation is a key element in lateral violence or lateral oppression. And the collective part is where a number of people work together to negatively attack or undermine another person, another department, another group within the community. So for example, we as an organization, or the people doing this kind of work, we have experienced lateral oppression and doing this work to try to educate about lateral oppression. So people will kind of like make fun of the work that we do. So for example, oh, here comes those touchy-feely people. Oh, we're going to go to this wellness and healing training. What are we going to do? Stand in a circle and hold hands and sing kumbaya? Like, so they'll try to make fun of it, right? But because we have our trauma and healing lens on, like, we know where that behavior is coming from, right? So we don't take it personal, and we don't get mad, or we don't try to, you know, laterally oppress them worse than they're oppressing us. So we understand, right? So it's a group of people that are trying to collectively put down or hold down another group of people. Okay, so that plays out in different ways too. So for example, when someone in our family or someone in our community tries to stop drinking, as an example, right? And other people will collectively attack that person, or collectively attack that sobriety community that might be in a community, right? Oh, who do you think you are? You think you're being better than us for quitting drinking, right? Oh, who do you think you are? You know, all this kind of stuff. Those are examples of lateral oppression when we do that, right? Or when we look at people trying to learn their culture, learn their language, learn how to make a traditional rattle or a drum, or attend ceremony. And then what do people do? Oh, who do you think you are? Trying to be a big Indian, you know? That's an example of lateral oppression, okay? Or when someone tries to go to school and get educated in Western academia, same kind of thing. Oh, who do you think you are? You're trying to be white, trying to be better than us, all this kind of stuff, right? When tons of examples of lateral oppression, you gave a lot of them in the comments. So keep them coming, so we can see how they play out. So those are examples of again, us continuing the work of the colonizers. So we're continuing to keep trauma alive and well in our communities. Okay, so there's some stages in the lateral oppression, and you can kind of think of maybe when you were at the receiving end of this, or you can kind of think about when you were the ones perpetuating this lateral oppression on somebody else. So you're either like the abuser, or we can say the victim, and that's how some people describe it. But there's some stages that we go through for lateral oppression. Okay, so the first stage is, and this is based on the work of Janet Derrick. So back in the late 90s, she's from Canada. She did a lot of work around lateral oppression and lateral violence. And so the stages in the violence, the first stage is like the buildup, right? The buildup. So maybe there was something that happened that triggered something, right? And so all these emotions are starting to build up. Okay, so that's like the first stage. The second stage is the attack. Okay, so the attack could be going over to this person and gossiping and saying all this stuff, and then going over to this person and gossiping and saying all this stuff, and emailing people or putting stuff on social media. Like we see lateral oppression all the time on social media, right? Putting that on social media. So that's the attack, right? The lateral oppressive attack. And then the next phase is the retreat. Okay, the retreat. So we just did the attack and did all this stuff out there, and then now we're gonna retreat and step back a little bit, and then watch everything play out. Okay, so this is important to understand how trauma plays out as well, because one of the lasting impacts of trauma is being a chaos junkie, right? Being a chaos junkie, a drama queen or a drama king. And when we gossip and do all this kind of stuff, it stirs the pot, right? It stirs the pot. So when we do that, and then we sit back and then we just watch it all play out. Like we started it, but now other people are continuing it, right? So now we're just kind of like watching it play out. So the next phase is the denial. Oh, I didn't do anything, um and then the next phase is the quiet period. So everything gets quiet, kind of everybody kind of goes back to normal again. And then the next phase, the cycle begins again, and then it just goes and goes and goes. So you can think about in your personal experience how it plays out, and do you notice a cycle, right? Do you notice a cycle of how it plays out? So just having that awareness can kind of help us to deal with it, or help us to like nip it in the bud when we can. All right, so a list of I wanted to do half and half. We're already at 12:30, so I'm going to go through this list kind of fast. So you're getting the idea, right, of what lateral violence or lateral oppression is. Okay, so it comes out by gossip. We talked about that. Gossip is huge, and gossip is one of the reasons why we developed our wellness in the workplace curriculum. Is because of people were using the word toxic to describe their workplace. Toxic to describe their workplace. And it's simply because trauma, because of unresolved trauma, unhealed trauma, is why we have unhealthy workplaces. And gossip is like one of the core things. Okay, so gossip is like when we intentionally try to say things that aren't true about another person. Okay, to intentionally hurt them. Like that's what gossip is. And I always like to say, the opposite of that is like good gossip. And sometimes on social media, I'll post good gossip. Like, you know what I heard? Like, I heard that so and so just graduated from their language course. Or, you know what I heard? I just heard that so and so volunteered their time and cut wood for this family in the community. You know what I heard? Like good gossip, right? So I encourage you today, like spread some good gossip in your community. Okay, jealousy. So jealousy is a good one, and it's important to like really understand what that is and to be in touch with your own feelings. Like, what am I feeling right now? Like, am I feeling some way about this person because really I'm jealous of that person? Okay. Another big one for lateral violence is revenge. Is revenge. So it's like you did this to my family, so now I'm gonna do this to you, and but worse, right? So revenge is a big one. Blaming and judging. Okay, and I'm gonna just kind of go through this list real quick. Blaming and judging, shaming and guilting, shunning or ignoring, negative labeling, emphasizing the negative. We kind of already talked about that. Financial disabling or financial greediness. And we can even think about like in the programs that we work for or the departments that we work for, are we withholding um, funds? Are we withholding things so someone can't like be successful in their work? Are we setting them up to fail? So some things like that to be mindful of. Um, Firing or the threat of firing, selective hiring, and these are kind of like in the workplace, but you can see how they can play out otherwise too. Physical attacks, including possessions of somebody, like physically attacking their car, as an example, slashing their tires, breaking their windows, spray painting their homes, stealing their kids' toys, like that kind of stuff. Verbal attacks, um, spiritual attacks. So you can think about, whoa, what might that be? Attacking friends or family members, associates, children, um, obsessive concern about another person's behavior. So, like, you're always just so worried about what they're doing, who's doing what to who. Okay, that also contributes to blaming. Like, we always want to blame someone, right? So when we're always worried about what other people are doing or not doing or what's happening, like, yes, we might be nosy, but we're also trying to like be concerned about blaming somebody, right? And that becomes a part of it too. um, Sabotaging people's projects or jobs or family structures, um, threatening to harm somebody, bullying, like that's another example. Putting things on social media where you're spreading gossip or misinformation about somebody. So we can think about those kinds of behaviors too. Like cyber bullying is like real. And that's big too. Okay. So I'm kind of looking at the comments here. Yeah, so curious how to handle bad gossip while it's happening. So we're going to talk about some of these things like so what can we do about that? Okay, so we spent all that time talking about lateral violence and lateral oppression and some of the constructs of that, right? So everyone has this bigger picture and we're just kind of scratching the surface and talking really fast to get through it. So I want to talk about moving into the lateral love piece. So I'm wearing this shirt today called Healing is a Verb. And I intentionally wore this shirt. And by the way, I'll do a selfless commercial here. We now, because of you guys saying how you love these shirts, they're for sale. We have these shirts for sale now, and they're on our website, nativewellness.com. You can go and purchase a shirt, and these actually go back in to help us with our power hours. So anyway, that's a plug. But the message on the shirt, healing is a verb. So healing is the answer to trauma. So that means that healing is the answer to lateral oppression and lateral violence. Okay. Healing is the answer to going back to that pain and that hurt that started in 1492 and 1592 and 1692 and 1792 and 1892 and 1992, etc., etc. Like healing is the answer to that. Okay. Now healing, means to become whole, right? And it means to become whole physically, mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. So sometimes we have to do things for ourselves physically and mentally and emotionally and spiritually to heal, right? So healing is the answer to trauma. Lateral oppression is trauma. And when we're engaging in that, we're inflicting trauma on another person. So it means that we're holding on to a lot of stuff that that makes our heart like all filled with all kinds of stuff that just torques on the inside, right? And then it just comes out as toxicity in our words and the way we look, in our behaviors, the way we treat other people, right? So we can't have lateral love if we're just holding on to resentment and hurt and shame and pain and guilt and denial and all that kind of stuff that we hold on to. That's what feeds lateral oppression. When we hold on to all of that stuff, that's what feeds lateral oppression. Okay? So what healing does then, it takes all that torque, it takes all that stuff that we hold on to, and it starts to move it. It starts to create that shift. And we even have a shirt that says shift happens. So when we begin to heal, we start to take a look at that, right? And things start to loosen up inside of us, right? Things start to loosen up, and we start letting go of things. We start letting go of the unresolved grief that we had from when somebody passed away 20 years ago that we've been holding on to for dear life. Or we start to let go of the resentment that we had towards our parents or towards our ex, one of our exes, or to a sibling or whatever. We start letting go of that resentment. Or we start letting go of the shame that we hold on to because of what happened to us one time 30 years ago, that we've been holding on to all that stuff. So when we start to like loosen up all of that stuff, it's easier for us to let go. And the thing about trauma in my opinion and in my experience, and I'm 54 and I've been doing this kind of work since I was 19. So I've learned a lot about trauma in all those years. At 19, I was doing consulting work. I didn't even know what a consultant was, but in Indian boarding schools. So I was working with our young people all over in the Southeast, the Alaska, the Northwest, the Southwest, the Plains, the Midwest, all over. We were working in Indian boarding schools. So I've been doing this work for a long, long time. And so when our people hold on to all of these things, like I said, it comes out, and it often comes out as lateral oppression. So healing is the answer to trauma. So when we start letting go of the stuff that we hold on to, then we start making room. We can't experience or express lateral love unless we feel it inside of us. Does that make sense? So when we let go of all this stuff, then we can start focusing on the lateral love. What lateral love means is like showing love to another. Well, first, showing love to ourselves, right? When we love ourselves, we're going to engage in healing, right? So that lateral love, we can also call it lateral kindness. If you're not ready to say the L word, the love word, we can call it lateral kindness. We can call it lateral joy, lateral compassion, but it's exercising those things with another person. Okay, does that make sense? It's being nice to someone else. Okay, I'm trying to flip through the comments. It's being nice to someone else. So when we take healing as a verb, because we have to do something to heal, we have to take action to heal. When we do our healing, we want other people to heal too, because we know how good it feels like not to carry all that stuff anymore, right? When we heal and we're not carrying, my bag has been here for months, and I always use this as an example. When we carry around bags full of all that stuff, all those examples that I gave earlier, the rage, the anger, the guilt, the shame, unresolved grief, resentment, abandonment, like all the stuff that we hold on to, it gets tiring. And that's in part what makes us these negative, grouchy people, right? Is from packing all this stuff around for so long. It gets tiring. So when we heal, like we start letting go of some of that stuff, right? We can peek in here and let go of some of the stuff. And pretty soon, I have all these bags all over. I am a bag lady. But pretty soon we'll downsize like to a smaller bag, right? We can downsize to a smaller bag, and that's much more easier to manage, right? And we're smiling more, right? When people try to be laterally oppressive to us, we know where it's coming from and we don't take it personal. So we let it bounce right off. Someone tries to give us something and we just let it bounce right off. And we continue on our way. We continue to smile. We may even actually pray for that person. Not like, oh, I'm better than you and I'm going to pray for your pitiful little laterally oppressive person. But we genuinely pray for them because we know where their behavior is coming from. But when we don't release that and we hold on, we can't practice lateral love because our hearts are just filled with all that stuff. This is what happens. When someone says stuff about us behind our backs and they gossip to someone, but we hear about it, it's like it comes and it sticks to us. And someone else does something and says something and that sticks to us. And then someone says something and does something and that sticks to us. I know I look all crazy with all this stuff stuck on me, but this is what happens when people say or do something to someone else. Like it sticks to us. It sticks to us. And then this is what we give to other people, what we stick on other people. And it keeps going and going and going. Well, what if, this is what lateral love does. What if we give compliments to people? We give positive affirmations to people. We pat people on the back when they do something good. Like that can happen too. That can happen too. That builds us up. That lifts us up. That strengthens us as a people. Now, wouldn't that be awesome? This is in part why when people come to a native wellness training, they feel good because all these examples that we're giving, this is what we integrate into our training. Even online, we're doing that. These are the kinds of things that we integrate into our training. We do affirmation circles so people can feel it. They can feel it, right? And then when we feel things, that's going to help resonate these messages over and over in our heads in a good way. So when we feel that way and we let go of stuff, we can better practice lateral love with other people. Okay? So real quickly, I'm going to just talk about these 3 unspoken rules because these 3 unspoken rules keep us back from even like saying nice things to other people. Just kind of like when I gave the example of people would make fun of the work of the healing and wellness work that we do, and people would make fun of us. Oh, here comes those touchy-feely people. Like we knew where that was coming from, right? It was their trauma. And when we grow up in homes that are full of violence or addictions, things like that, when we grow up in those kinds of environments, we learn 3 unspoken rules. And those rules are don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. Don't talk, don't trust, don't feel. Okay? So sometimes, and it's not like our parents put these rules up on the fridge or stuck them on the mirror in the bathroom. It was through behaviors that we learned these unspoken rules, right? And then we go into a workplace and we're supposed to work together. We're supposed to collaborate with other people, or we get into relationships with another person, whether it's a friend or a significant other. And what are some of the 3 rules that are going to help those relationships be healthy? To talk, to trust, and to feel. Yet I just spent my whole life learning how not to do those things, to talk, trust, and feel. So we have to start breaking through those rules if we want to practice lateral love or lateral kindness, okay? And again, even the love word is hard for some of our people to say, right? And they can't say I love you. So if you can't say lateral love, just say lateral kindness, like to be kind to someone else, okay? So if we want to practice that lateral kindness, then we have to feel it inside of us, and we have to start breaking those rules. Don't talk, don't trust, don't feel, okay? So like right now, if you're on your phone watching, that's fine. You could do it later. But if you're on your desktop and maybe you're sitting at work or something, grab your phone, or you could even send an email, but practice a random act of kindness, like right now. Like go through your contacts and pick someone. I used to do this in my training, and I would just say, scroll your contacts randomly and just pick one, and then send them a lateral kindness text. Send them something nice. Say something nice. So do it right now. Get your phone, find someone in your phone, and just say something like, hey, just thinking about you. I hope you have a great day. Or thank you for being in my life. You're an inspiration. Okay? Or you're an amazing person. I appreciate you. All right? So go ahead, do that right now. You're practicing a random act of kindness. When we practice random acts of kindness, like we feel good and we're making the other person feel good. And who knows what that person might do, right? How it will impact their day. So the key about doing these random acts of kindness, or even when we do intentional acts of lateral kindness, is that we have to practice it. Because if this isn't our norm, we have to make it our norm. If lateral violence is the norm, then we have to do that healing work and start shifting to make lateral kindness our norm. Does that make sense? Okay. So breaking through those rules of don't talk, don't trust, don't feel helps us to practice that lateral kindness. Okay. So intentionally telling something else something good about them. Intentionally telling them something nice about them. Okay. Okay. And some of you are doing it on here. Like you can give each other practice a lateral kindness on the things. Okay, awesome. Marcus, I didn't mean to me, but I meant like to each other, but thank you for that. So we can make that our new norm and challenge yourself. I'm going to do one act of lateral kindness today. And tomorrow I'm going to bump up my game and I'm going to do 2, right? And the next day after that, I'm going to bump up my game and I'm going to do 3. So imagine if that becomes your norm, and then you start changing that norms in your family. Imagine if you do that at work and you start changing those norms in your place of work, right? And then how that goes out. So shift can happen. Shift can happen, right? There's tons of examples out there of how this shift has happened, right? And how things have changed in families. Things have changed in tribal programs or tribal departments or tribes as a whole, as organizations as a whole. Like it can happen. And when that happens, what we're doing, we're going back to the way our ancestors used to live, right? Like I don't have this like romanticized idea about how my ancestors were, but I know because of the examples that are in our language and the examples that are in our value systems that have endured colonization, that our people knew that everybody was a gift from the Creator. and they treated each other as such. Imagine, imagine if that was still a value today. We wouldn't be mean to people, right? We can still address serious issues like racism, as an example, or other challenges that come up in relationships or in families. We can still address things, but we can do it in a good way, right? We can do things in a good way. Okay, so just be mindful of that. The last thing, I knew our time would just fly by, but the last thing I want to talk about was, so what if you work in a place that is toxic, that lateral oppression is the norm, right? But this is your only option for employment. And you've tried to say things in other departments and you got fired. Then you got a job over here in this department and it's just as toxic. And you might be in a rural area and you don't have a lot of options for employment. So what can you do when you're at the receiving end of lateral oppression? Or you may even find yourself at the perpetuating or giving, being that bully. Okay, so what can you do? Well, this is where the lateral love or the lateral kindness is so important too, because you can start with yourself. So if you're in a situation like that, then you have to practice self-care. You have to set those boundaries. You have to get the support system. You have to get the one person that you can go to vent or to problem solve with, or just to get it out and hear you out. You have to practice like deep breathing. And one of the biggest things that you can do to help you is to become trauma and healing informed. So when we learn about trauma and we learn more about trauma and we learn more about trauma, we will see it clearly. We will see it play out clear as day. Okay, that's what I always say. I have my trauma and healing lens on because I can see it play out clearly. And that, being trauma and healing informed, helps me not to take things personal. It helps me to better understand that someone else's behavior is just that. It's their behavior. It's their pain and hurt that's coming out. And I don't need to hold on to that and make it stick to me and make me feel bad. So that takes practice. Okay, that takes practice because it's hard. Like, I hear, or people will say things and sometimes I may let it affect me, but most of the time I don't. Or if it affects me, I'll just let it affect me for a little bit and then I let it go. Okay, so those are some suggestions of how we can deal with it. The other thing how we can deal with it is by practicing that lateral kindness, right? And so what happens when we hold on to guilt and shame and pain and unresolved grief and all that stuff that we hold on to, when we hold on to that, our body literally like vibrates at a lower vibration. Like everything vibrates. That's how energy is measured. Okay, and we learn in fourth grade in our science class that everything is energy, right? The chair that I'm sitting on is energy. My pen is energy. These post-it notes are energy. The grass outside is energy. Trees are energy. Everything is energy, right? And energy is measured by vibration. That's why when people say, oh, sending you good vibes, right? Oh, that's good vibes over there. Vibes is short for vibrations. Okay, so everything has a vibration. And all those emotions that I talked about, the anger, the fear, the rage, the resentment, that vibrates at a lower level than love and joy and compassion and kindness. That vibrates at a higher level. So we can feel that. We can feel that we can think about when we're in a meeting, when we're in a family gathering, when we're at a community gathering. Sometimes we go into those spaces and we leave feeling like, oh my gosh, I feel like I need a shower, right? Because the energy in there was like all thick and like all yucky. And then sometimes we might go to a meeting, a family gathering, a community gathering, well, pre-pandemic anyway. And we might feel so awesome. We feel like we can levitate, right? Because that energy was so good. It was filled with love and kindness and positivity and support and guidance. And we feel so good, right? That can be a norm. That was a norm for our ancestors, like it really was. And we can get back there again if we choose. Like if we choose. Like that's how powerful we are. So, to recap, today was about lateral oppression, what it is and why we have it. And when we engage in that kind of behaviors, bullying or gossiping, trying to tear other people down, we're continuing the work of our colonizers. Okay. And when we begin to shift our thinking and shift our own internal stuff that we hold on to, when we start churning that up so it loosens up and breaks apart so we can let it go and get rid of it, then we make the space inside of us to practice that lateral love or that lateral kindness. We create that space where joy can be, where love can be, where compassion can be. Okay. And the last story, I was sharing this with a friend the other day. Many years ago, like back in 2007, the Native Wellness Institute was invited to Seattle, Washington for this event called Seeds of Compassion. And they were bringing in the Dalai Lama, like all these world spiritual leaders. And the Dalai Lama requested that 1,000 drummers of all different cultures open the procession. They played in this big stadium where the Seahawks play. So we were helping to organize the tribes and getting tribal representation there with their hand drums. And so we were the Dalai Lama had requested to meet with all of the tribal people before this big procession. So we were all gathered in this room, like 200 of us in this room, waiting for the Dalai Lama to come. So we're all waiting. And then these Secret Service men came in and they said, "We're sorry, but the Dalai Lama won't be able to meet with you today. He's on a conference call because at that time, the Chinese people were killing his people, the Tibetan people, and he had to go deal with that." So we're like, "Oh man, the Dalai Lama won't, well, that's okay. We'll go to the procession and we'll still get to see him and hear him." And so they told everyone, "Go ahead and go eat or do whatever, we'll start pretty soon." So most everyone left except us. And like, there was like 30 or 40 of us still in this room. And we're just standing there and we're looking, "Oh, where's our tickets? Where's our seats?" And then something shifted in the room. And we all kind of look up and we're looking around like, what just happened? And in walks the Dalai Lama. So we could feel him before we could see him. You could feel him before he got into the room. And the best word that I have to describe it is that you could feel love. Like you could feel love. So this is a man that was just on a call because his people were being murdered. And yet he exudes love. And he walked into this room and he took the time to individually bless every single one of us. It was like awesome. So what that profound experience did for me was it makes me think, what do people feel when I walk into a room? Do people feel like they need a shower because of the toxicity I'm bringing in and the negativity and all of that? Or do they feel good and they feel uplifted? My goal, I want people to feel good and to feel uplifted after they've been in contact with me. That's like one of my life goals, actually. And it's what I strive to do. So lateral oppression contributes to the chronic negativity I talked about, but it also contributes to complainers. Okay? Complainers. So are you a complainer or are you a solution-oriented person? Because complaining really doesn't do much, right? So if you complain, also bring a solution. Okay, that makes your complaint more powerful when you have a solution to that. That's an example of that shift, right? We're not just going to be this complainer, but we're also going to come with a solution. So it's already, we're 2 minutes over already. I knew this was going to fly by fast. Maybe we'll come and do another one again, a part 2 on lateral oppression. But I hope you enjoyed this power hour. We are here every day, 5 days a week at noon Pacific. Here on our Facebook channel. We encourage you to share this with your family and friends. All of the power hours are saved and they're kept on our Facebook page, and they're also put on our YouTube channel. So you can go back and binge out on our power hours. We're grateful for the support from the Urban Indian Health Institute this week. They're sponsoring these power hours. We're grateful for Abigail Echohawk and her leadership and her support. Of course, we're grateful to each of you for tuning in and for sharing and for just being the awesome human beings that you are. So hi 10 to you. You're an awesome human being. We're glad that you were here, and we'll see you tomorrow. Okay, have a good one. And now I got to figure out how to stop this.